Speaking of things that were posted on Twitter that have sparked interesting discussions, Roman, who is he's the player manager of G2.
This was the other thing that made the internet meltdown, I noticed, yeah. It's like the civil war about whether the Scrim results should be shared or not, I know.
He posted all of their Scrim results from all year. All of the splits,
year.
MSI, Worlds, everything. And just to show their schedule. Now, I personally find this to be very interesting. And I think it's cool, rather harmless transparency about G2 as the team. And frankly, is just good branding for G2 because somehow after they were eliminated, all we can fucking talk about is G2. G2 is very good at being the center of attention, guys. So actually shout out to them because brilliant publicity move, you have to say.
Also, here's what's so weird about this whole topic, Monty. Is like, one, there's an obvious reason why Romain would do this, because all of you disingenuous little fucks on the internet tried to pretend G2 going 0-2 in a single best of 3 meant they were never good and they were just frauds because you all have static analytical thinking. So the same as you all now pretend you always thought NRG was sick, even though I read all the Reddit threads in summer and I saw all your opinions coming into now and I saw you all so certain they weren't going to win. And I know none of you put the money on the 5 or 6 to 1 odds. So I know all that's nonsense. You all now pretend they were always good. That's why the narrative around NRG, which we'll get to later, is every other NA owner's a moron because why didn't they just sign these players that used to be in academy any amount of time ago? Which is probably the most insanely disingenuous narrative you could ever concoct because, spoiler, NRG wouldn't have picked these players if they had money, you fucking cretin. These are obviously budget roster players, you actual idiot. But they're not going to come out and say that. Now, the thing I'll tie it back into, though, the maddest part about this is I think this, again, is just an example of the person doing the complaining is what gets all the attention. It isn't the topic. Do you know why I know it's that Dom did it? Here's how I know, and that Dom and Rich, it was Rich who did it first, and then Dom really blew it up by responding. The reason I know it's them that are getting attacked, Monty, not the topic, is because if you, like, am I actually the only one who remembers history? All year long in G2, they have said stuff in interviews that, well, in scrims, actually, we were winning again. On this fucking show, Dylan Falco was talking about how they beat JDG in Scrim. This has been a very, very common topic among Western teams at and around international competition. And by the way, for what I think is the whole reason behind doing this, which is to show that when all the fans go, you're all just trash and you could never have won it. It's like, no, actually our problem essentially is sometimes the results don't translate to the stage. And maybe in scrims, like in this case, by the way, I do think another reason they did it is because it wasn't just that they had the amazing record against the Asian teams. They were murking NRG. They needed to get that out there, Monty. They needed the fans to know that was one. I think that was definitely part of it because I know when I went down, that's the first one out. Whoa! Everyone else were like, "Whoa, JDG! Like, what the hell? They were like 7-6." I just saw they were like 12-2 against NRG, and I was like, "Oh, right. I think I know why this got released." But anyway, my point is, essentially, half the people complaining who are coaches in the scene, you do this yourself. You just don't do it as efficiently. You don't give us an Excel sheet. What you do is you say on our show, "Oh, actually, in scrims, we were doing quite well against T1," or. But by the way, I notice it's always when it's against the Western. Basically, if it's against your team, you complain. If it's against an Asian team, you love to tell me how you're beating them. Cloud9 loved to tell me years ago how they were taking games off fucking T1. TSM couldn't stop screaming about how they were beating everyone except Samsung White in fucking Worlds that one time, and they were murking blue, and that's why if they'd have gotten the different bracket draw. It's probably one of the most common actual framings of the event ever, because, as you see here, nearly always the Western team gets dumpstered, don't they? Like, and then when you get dumpstered, you don't want the fans to actually think, oh my God, and I bet in scrims they really never won one. Meanwhile, by the way, here's what's mad. Why is it okay, Monty? No, why is it unacceptable for me to say, by the way, I beat your team 70% of the time, but then NRG was bragging we were winning 10% of scrims? Why is it okay to say you lost all the... It's the same concept. I can't even believe this is a real topic, because I actually find the abstract quite interesting. Should you... essentially the abstract, by the way, isn't the results. It's things like, why do teams do better in scrims and don't? Like Don was trying to do. Are they actually trying to experiment? Were they the ones who were try-harding? Like famously, I think TSM was. I think they just wanted to beat Samsung Blue.
Scrim, back in the try harder for sure.
Yeah, that's the interesting discussion, which has loads of great context. And by the way, that's actually what I want to hear from coaches and players. Like, does your team try too much? Are you ones that think we don't care about the scrims? That's a great convo. The idea, it's some like breaking of the seal on it. What are you doing? That's inside info. That sort of beggars belief a little bit for me. That beggars belief a bit for me. I think it's just because loads of the teams were losing in the scrim records. I think they just salted that G2 did it.
Yeah, and I think also we can talk about this, but if you just look at the Scrim results, you miss what Roman had actually posted earlier, which is saying kind of very heartfelt message that about how hard the fucking team tried this year. And I think part of the impetus is to show how fucking hard this team worked, how many Scrim blocks they had, how seriously they were taking this, because they're obviously under fire right now for what was, we'll get to that result, but it was basically a single underperformance against NRG.
Yes.
If we're being honest, like they were not expected to win their matches versus Gen G or BLG. Those were games in which they were the underdog. As we discussed on this show, I thought they were the favorites against D+ and Weibo, and they indeed won both of those games. The Weibo game was a little ropey, has to be said.
Both of them were a bit sus. Like they tried to throw them, but look, they were playing the two teams in the world. That law was going, no, sir, back. Like when you're, in England where you offer someone the last biscuit and you go, you take the last one. No, after you. Like they politely, return the favour. So fair play. I agree. Look, here's the problem. G2 probably got overrated because of those two results, but then now they're getting insanely underrated, mate. Because as you say, by the way, first and foremost, let's not even talk about the Gen G one. Shut the fuck up. NRG wouldn't have beaten Gen G, you cretins. No one had a chance to win that game except for about two teams in this tournament. Then the BLG one, that's even when BLG's like ironed out all the kinks playing against all the other really good teams. It's really, as you said, just the NRG result. And I'll just throw this in there as well. Gen G one's fine because if you look at the teams that were 2-0, actually G2 is the worst team of that group. They should be getting JDG or Gen G at that point in time. The BLG one is incredibly rough. Like, we'll get into the NRG angle soon. NRG just waltzed through this tournament with the craziest draws I've ever seen. By the way, you are aware there's a world where like G2 could have drawn Fnatic at that 2-2 game. Isn't that a win? Aren't they now in the playoffs? Aren't we now talking? Suddenly, doesn't that one win change how everything's being talked, how the year's being talked about, how this? And I'll just add one last little detail in. I tried to preempt this the whole year by telling you all it was bad enough when they brought in 4 seeds from LPL and 4 seeds from LPL and LCK last year with the old group. In this one, the expectation for real should be 0 Western teams make it out. Essentially, to make it out, you should actually need an incredibly lucky draw. And then we'll get to that with the NRG one. Like, basically, you should always end up drawing at least one LPL or LCK team. So that's one life gone probably immediately. And in the case of G2, they actually had a pretty tough draw if you look at it. The joke is the NRG game was the only one that was in theory the layup. And as we then saw, it turns out NRG played a fantastic game.
Yeah, and that should be the narrative as well. I think a lot of people expect us to kind of talk down NRG in this situation. Look, we discussed how horrific their Mad Lions game was. I mean, they had some stinkers, guys. Like they basically, I mean, we're seeing the Weibo series that they're going to play in quarterfinals is a rematch of their first game, and they played horrifically at the start of that game. It was an insane stomp by Weibo because of mistakes that they made very early on in the laning phase and tower dives that snowballed absolutely out of control in the early game. And as for the Mad Lions game, like they played that one really quite poorly as well. However, they did play the G2 series extremely well. And I'm not trying to take that away from them. That was probably the best League of Legends I have ever seen them play. Not a stretch because they haven't played a lot of League of Legends, very good League of Legends. But in that series, Contracts, Palafox, and Ignar were just on fire, and they looked really good. And Contracts had some great games. Ignar had some great games. They closed really efficiently. They punished mistakes. They beat G2 about as hard as it is possible to beat G2 in that series. Right?
Game one,
especially that first game.
Yeah.
Especially that game number 1. The snowball was excellently done. It was perhaps, a couple of mistakes at the beginning, but once they started getting momentum, they were extremely precise. They were lethal in terms of their closure. Their macro was great. Their aggression was great. Zoning around objectives was great. Everything was great. They looked like a world-class team in that moment. And that is the truth, right? That is the truth about this team, is that they showed real brilliance in those games. And it wasn't just G2 being bad, which they were, but you have to be able to punish those mistakes efficiently, and NRG 100% delivered on that.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.